this is the lecture over lymphatic and immune systems. If you open to that chapter in your textbook and follow along. The introduction here I want to take time to read through and really understand. It says the lymphatic system and the immune system are considered together in this chapter because of the aspects of their functions in the body are very closely related. Lymph is a clear, watery fluid. It surrounds the body cells and flows in a system of thin-walled lymph vessels that extends throughout our whole body, the lymphatic system. Lymph is different from blood, though. It has a close relationship to the blood system. Lymph fluid does not contain erythrocytes or platelets, but it is rich in two types of white blood cells, lymphocytes and monocytes. The liquid part of lymph is similar to blood plasma because it's water, salts, sugar, and wastes of metabolism like urea and creatinine, but it differs in that it contains less protein. Lymph actually originates from the blood. It's the same fluid that filters out of tiny blood capillaries into the spaces between the cells. This fluid that surrounds the body cells then is called interstitial fluid. It's kind of a hard word to say, interstitial fluid. Interstitial fluid passes continuously through specialized thin-walled vessels called lymph capillaries, which are found coursing through tissue spaces. The lymph capillaries. The fluid in the lymph capillaries, now called lymph instead of that interstitial fluid. So once it gets in there, then all of a sudden we change names, right? It's called lymph. It passes through the larger lymphatic vessels and through clusters of lymph tissue, which are lymph nodes, we hear them called, finally reaching large lymphatic vessels in the upper chest. Lymph enters these large lymphatic vessels and then they empty into the bloodstream. The lymph system has several functions, okay? 3 different things. First of all, it's a drainage system. It transports needed proteins and fluid that leaked out of the blood capillaries back into the bloodstream via the veins. Okay, so it's a drainage system. Second, the lymphatic vessels in the intestines absorb lipids or fats from the small intestine and transport them to the bloodstream. So it transports lipids and fats. And third, it relates to our immune system, the defense of the body against foreign organisms like bacteria and viruses. So lymphocytes and monocytes originating in the bone marrow, lymph nodes, and organs like your spleen and thymus protect our body against or by producing antibodies and mounting a cellular attack on foreign cells and organisms. And so you can see the picture at the bottom is the interstitial fluid and then how it gets into those lymph capillaries and is called lymph then. And then on the next page, the blue and the red here showing going through the circulatory systems of the blood and lymph as well. On the next page, you see the anatomy of the lymphatic system, and you can read about those and lymph nodes. Under the spleen and thymus gland section, it's kind of interesting. They talk about our spleen here. It's located in the upper left quadrant of your abdomen next to the stomach. The spleen is not essential to life, but it does have important function. So we can live without the spleen. Okay, that's what that sentence says, although it's not essential to life, meaning we don't have to have one. They talk about 1, 2, 3, 4 here, what it does, okay, the important functions. And then underneath that it says, the spleen is susceptible to injury. A sharp blow to the upper abdomen, like the impact of a car's steering wheel, sometimes the seatbelt, can cause rupture of the spleen. Massive hemorrhage can occur when the spleen is ruptured. Immediate surgical removal can be necessary in those instances. But when you take out your spleen, the liver, the bone marrow, and the lymph nodes take over those 4 functions that are listed above. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. What is next that I want to make sure we review is natural and adaptive immunity on the next page. Immunity, as maybe you know, is the body's ability to resist foreign organisms and toxins that damage tissues and organs. Natural immunity is resistance present at birth. It's not dependent on any previous exposure to an antigen or infectious agent. It's present at birth. An example of natural immunity is the body's handling of a bacterial infection. White blood cells respond immediately to the intruding antigens. Neutrophils travel to the infected area and ingest bacteria. Other white blood cells like monocytes, macrophages, and lymphocytes also participate in the body's natural immunity against infection. Typically, there's no immunological memory with natural immunity. In addition to natural immunity, it says a healthy person can develop adaptive immunity. This is your body's ability to recognize and remember specific antigens in an immune response. Lymphocytes are part of an adaptive immunity, so they remember. T cells recognize and remember specific antigens and produce stronger attacks each time the antigen is encountered. B cells secrete antibodies against antigens. Your B cells secrete antibodies which not only destroy the virus but remain in the blood so that when that virus comes back or reappears at a later time, you have adaptive immunity to it. Another example of adaptive immunity is that achieved with a vaccination. You are given an injection of a killed virus, for example, poliovirus. It doesn't make you ill, but it stimulates your B cells to secrete antibodies against the poliovirus so that if you are exposed to it at some later time, you're already immune to it. Okay, that's what happens with a vaccination. In certain instances, more immediate adaptive immunity is necessary. Poisons or toxins that rapidly cause major damage, for example, snake venom, can be counteracted by giving ready-made antibodies called antitoxins or antivenom produced in another organism. Injections of other ready-to-made antibodies such as immunoglobulins can boost your adaptive immunity before you travel to a foreign country maybe. Infants acquire adaptive immunity when they receive maternal antibodies through the placenta before birth or in the breast milk. You can see below there's a table there that talks about natural immunity and adaptive immunity, and those are super good and interesting for you, I think. After the yellow vocab, we get to our blue boxes. So when we look at all combining forms, suffixes, and prefixes here, we start with immuno, lympho, lymphadeno, spleno. Note with spleno, do you see the word spleen? Okay, spleen has two E's. Spleno doesn't. Okay, put a star next to that one. That's a huge spelling difference there. Thymo for thymus gland, toxo for poison. And then we have just a couple of prefixes here, ana and inter. And that's like the smallest blue boxes ever so far. And I think for the rest of the chapters too. There's only a few combining forms and two prefixes, ana and inter. So then we go to pathologic conditions like we always do. They talk about AIDS. Underneath AIDS, we talk about HIV. You know, I have written here, you know, which comes first? AIDS or HIV, okay? In that first sentence, the paragraph that describes it says AIDS is caused by HIV or human immunodeficiency virus. So HIV comes first, okay, which can develop into AIDS and maybe it never does, all right? But you have to have HIV first. You can read through some of these infections associated with AIDS are talked about in the tables, the common routes of transmission with AIDS. Hypersensitivity and allergy is important, and that's a good paragraph for you to read through. An allergy is an abnormal hypersensitivity acquired by exposure to an antigen, and it can be anything, as maybe we know. You see there bold allergic rhinitis, systemic anaphylaxis, asthma, hives, atopic dermatitis, rashes, things like that we all get when we have some kind of an allergy. Allergy can mean something different for each one of us. So reading through allergy, lymphomas are really good. And then lab tests are the last kind of part of the chapter here. The CD4 cell count is good. The ELISA is good for you to understand. The ELISA and the Western blot there is important. ELISA is a screening test to detect the HIV antibodies in our bloodstream. So antibodies to HIV begin to appear within 2 weeks of infection with HIV. So within 2 weeks, you will know if you've been infected with HIV and have it or not. If it's positive, then it's followed up with the Western blot test. So ELISA comes first, and then the Western blot. Immunoelectrophoresis is something it separates or divides out immunoglobulins. The viral load test is how much of the AIDS virus is in the bloodstream. So again, we start with ELISA to see if we have HIV. Then we follow up with the Western blot. This is a very delicate situation. We want to make sure, right? And then the viral load can be done to see how much of the HIV virus, or the AIDS virus, is in the bloodstream. Then we have clinical procedures, just one CT, and then abbreviations. And out of those abbreviations, I would say the AIDS, the HIV, and the HSV or herpes simplex would be the most common.